The heater was broken again. It hissed every few minutes like it was trying to whisper something. I sat on the floor of the laundry room, staring at a loose tile I'd never bothered to fix, with a towel under the door to keep the light from leaking out. My phone battery was at 2%, and the only thing playing in my earbuds was the spin cycle. I wasn't hiding. At least, not at first. I just needed a minute. Just 1 minute away from everything. From the clinking of forks at dinner, from her glassy-eyed smile, from the sound of my name being said like a chore. 1 minute to feel invisible. I didn't know that in that same minute, my marriage would die on the other side of the wall. She didn't know I was in there. She thought I went for a late-night drive like I usually did when her voice got too sharp and my presence too heavy. I didn't leave this time. I stayed. And I heard everything. It's not that I hate him. God, I wish I did. That'd make it easier. Her voice was flat, like she'd said it 1,000 times in her head already. It's just, I feel like I've spent the last 4 years trying to love a man I never actually chose. He was just there, reliable, too kind to say no to. There was silence, the kind that fills an entire house and makes furniture shift. Then the voice of her sister, Jocelyn, barely above a whisper. So, what are you going to do? Another pause. I don't know. Sometimes I wish he'd just leave. The heater hissed again, and I swear, for a second, I thought it was laughing. I didn't move. Not for an hour. Not when she walked past the laundry room door to get water. Not when I heard her turn off the lights and settle into our bed, alone. I just sat there, staring at that stupid tile, realizing I had been patching everything but her honesty. This wasn't some sudden confession. This was a truth that had existed long before tonight. One she'd simply been waiting for a convenient time to say out loud. And now that she had, the silence between us wasn't silence anymore. It was a verdict. I didn't go to work the next morning. I didn't even check my email. I just drove. No destination, no music, no voice in my head to guide me. Just the sound of tires humming over wet asphalt and my own silence pressing down like a weight on my chest. I passed the gas station we used to stop at for cinnamon coffee. I passed the grocery store where she once cried in the parking lot because I bought the wrong oat milk. I kept driving until the city felt like someone else's memory. Somewhere just outside the state line, I pulled over into an empty rest stop and parked under a flickering light. It was barely morning. The sky was bruised gray. I stared at the dashboard clock ticking forward, minute by minute, like it was mocking me. I could feel my heart beating in my teeth. That was when it hit me. I had no idea who to call. No friends I hadn't let fade. No family I hadn't distanced myself from to keep her happy. I had built a life that revolved so tightly around her orbit that the moment I stepped out of it, I was just drifting. I tried to sleep in the car, but my mind replayed every tiny moment. All the things I once thought were quirks, now echoing like warnings I had ignored. The way she never said, "I love you," without me saying it first. The way her hugs always came with a tap on the back like a signal it was time to let go. The way she flinched, just slightly, when I touched her hair. I realized something else in that empty parking lot. She hadn't just fallen out of love with me. She had never really been in it. I was a placeholder, a safe harbor, a cardboard cutout of comfort until something better came along, or until the illusion got too heavy to carry. And now, her voice was burned into my brain, saying it like a line rehearsed. Sometimes I wish he'd just leave. She didn't say it with venom. She said it like someone asking Alexa to set a reminder. So I decided to give her what she wanted. I texted my boss and told him I needed a few days off. Told him I had food poisoning. Technically, that wasn't a lie. Something inside me was rotting. I used a prepaid debit card we kept for emergencies to book a week at a cheap cabin 2 hours away. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no mirrors. Just me. And silence. I didn't tell her where I was. Didn't text. Didn't even turn on my location. I wanted to see how long it would take before she noticed I was gone. Before she cared. When I arrived at the cabin, the key was under the mat like the email said. There was a faint smell of wood smoke and mildew, like someone had recently tried to air out 100 forgotten secrets. The walls were thin. The heater was loud. The water ran brown for a minute before clearing. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I was alone in a space that didn't feel like a performance. I made myself a cup of instant coffee. No oat milk. Just bitter, cheap black coffee. And I sat at the edge of the bed, holding it with both hands, and whispered aloud. She doesn't love me. The words didn't shatter me. They freed me. but not in a triumphant way. Not like a bird flying from a cage. More like the cage fell off a cliff and I was still inside, just less afraid of the fall now. On the fourth day, I finally turned my phone back on. I'd convinced myself that when I did, there would be a flood of missed calls, frantic texts, maybe even a voicemail filled with panic, something to indicate that my absence had stirred the smallest ripple in her world. Instead, all I saw was a single message from her, sent 2 days ago. Hey, did you take the blue shoes with you? I can't find them. That was it. Not, where are you? Not, are you okay? Not even call me. Just a passive, almost indifferent question about her stupid cobalt blue heels. The ones she wore to brunch with her sister, to art galleries where I trailed behind her like a ghost. I remembered those shoes. I remembered carrying them in my hand while she walked barefoot after weddings, complaining about the pain. Now they were more important than me. I didn't respond. I didn't even open the message. I sat there in that freezing cabin, staring at the screen, trying to convince myself it was a joke, that she was pretending not to worry, that any minute now, she'd follow up with something real, something human. But nothing came. The silence was louder than any accusation. I started thinking about all the times she told me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too in my head. How every time I tried to bring up the distance between us, she'd sigh like I'd asked her to solve a math problem after a long day. She always made me feel like the cracks in our marriage were imaginary, that I was inventing pain just to keep her attention. But I wasn't crazy. I was unwanted. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind kept pushing against the windows like it wanted in. I laid on the lumpy mattress in the dark, eyes wide open, and asked myself a question I hadn't dared think about until then. What if she was already with someone else? It wasn't jealousy that made me ask, it was logic. A woman who feels trapped doesn't wait for the door to open. She finds another exit. And I'd left the door wide open the moment I vanished. Maybe she didn't call because someone else was calling. Maybe she didn't ask where I was because she didn't want me to come back. I knew I shouldn't, but I opened her Instagram. Her profile was still public. She had posted 2 stories. One was of her food at a rooftop bar. The other was a boomerang of a cocktail clinking against someone else's glass. Not mine. I screenshotted the glass. The ring on the man's hand wasn't familiar. Was I spiraling? Maybe. But I had nothing else to do with the silence except crawl into it. Then something strange happened. I logged into our shared Amazon account out of habit. I hadn't used it in days. We had Prime, mostly for her deliveries, fancy skincare, expensive teas, books she never finished. But there, at the top of the recent orders, was something that made my stomach ice over. A burner phone. Ordered 2 days ago. Delivered to our house. I blinked at the screen like it was written in another language. Why would she need a burner phone? She had an iPhone. The newest model. We shared a plan. She never even liked technology, called it a distraction. So who was she trying not to distract? I refreshed the page. Next to the burner phone was something else, a USB voice recorder. The kind used in interviews, therapy sessions, or private conversations. I didn't sleep that night either. 3 days after the burner phone discovery, I told myself I wasn't going back. Not yet. Not for her. Not even to confront her. But I needed a few things, documents, my laptop, a watch my dad gave me when I graduated, things I couldn't replace. I figured I'd be in and out in 10 minutes. She usually left for yoga around 10 a.m. on Sundays. I planned around that. When I pulled up to the house, my hands were shaking. Not from fear. Not even from anger. From the kind of slow, invisible dread that creeps up on you like mold behind drywall. The kind you ignore until the whole foundation starts to rot. The garage was closed. The curtains were drawn. The front door looked exactly the same as when I left it. But something felt off. Not visibly. Not audibly. Just wrong. The air felt heavy, like the silence was holding its breath. I used my old key. It still worked. That somehow made it worse. Inside, the living room was clean, too clean. The blanket that used to live on the couch was gone. So were the throw pillows I always complained about. The photo of us on the hallway wall had been replaced by a minimalist print that simply said, "Breathe." The irony made my stomach flip. I moved through the house like a stranger, careful not to make noise, even though I believed she was gone. That belief vanished when I heard a voice upstairs. A male voice. Low, relaxed, laughing. Then hers. Playful. Familiar in a way that made my spine straighten and my fists clench without realizing. I didn't mean to listen. I didn't mean to stay. But my legs wouldn't move. I just stood at the bottom of the stairs, one foot on the first step, breathing like I'd run a marathon. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone said everything. They weren't arguing. They weren't discussing anything heavy. They were laughing. She was laughing. In our bedroom. With a man I didn't know. I backed up slowly, heart hammering in my ears, and slipped into the hallway toward the office. I shut the door quietly and sat down at the desk, my brain moving 1,000 miles a second but going nowhere. What was I supposed to do? Storm up there and scream? Demand explanations? What would that even accomplish? She already said she wished I'd just leave. I already had. I wasn't her husband anymore, not really. I was just a name on a lease and a ghost in her rear view. But then I saw something on the desk that stopped my thoughts cold. Her journal. Callie never wrote things down. She hated the idea of emotional evidence. Said journals were crutches for people who don't know how to communicate. So why did she have one now? I know I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. And what I found inside wasn't romantic. Wasn't poetic. It was clinical. Dates. Names. Observations. Times. Even timestamps. March 18th. W left the room at 2:14 a.m. Returned 2:32 a.m. Seems agitated. March 24th. Phone placed face down again. Suspect he's hiding something. Record behavior after dinner. April 2nd. Talked about mother again. Trigger? Pattern of regression? It wasn't a journal. It was a log. Of me. She was writing about me like I was a subject. Like I was something she was studying. There was no emotion in the entries. No anger. No affection. Just data. Reactions. Habits. Private things I never said out loud, but clearly showed without knowing. I flipped forward. May 1st, he's gone. No call. No text. Will monitor absence. Unexpected, but useful. Useful? What the hell did that mean? Before I could make sense of it, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I closed the book, shoved it under my hoodie, and slipped out the office door through the side hallway, avoiding the front entirely. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see his face. I didn't want to hear her voice again. I got in my car, threw the journal on the passenger seat, and started driving with no idea where I was going. I wasn't ready to read more of it. But I also couldn't stop thinking about the one word she used. Useful. Not painful, not unexpected, not cruel. Just useful. Like my disappearance was a variable she had been waiting to test. Like I was part of something I never agreed to be part of. I told myself I wouldn't read the rest of the journal while I was driving, but I made it barely 5 minutes before pulling over on the side of a narrow road near a field of dead corn stalks. I needed answers. Not to understand her. I had long since accepted that I never truly would. I needed to understand what I had been to her. Whether it was love or convenience or something much more disturbing. The next few pages were methodical. Cold. Like a researcher cataloging the behaviors of an animal in captivity. She wrote about my movements. What time I brushed my teeth. When I stared too long at the television menu without pressing play. When I sighed in bed, even if I wasn't aware I had. And then I turned to a page dated April 7th. And for a second, I genuinely couldn't breathe. Met with J. He agrees W is no longer emotionally sustainable. Too compliant. No resistance. Minimal threat. May proceed. No resistance. Minimal threat. That's how she saw me. As something to proceed past. Like a hurdle that had already collapsed under its own weight. There were more names. J was mentioned several times. Context told me it was the man I heard upstairs. But there were others, too. Jax, N, and a few pages later, E. Some pages were heavily redacted, with thick black lines drawn over entire paragraphs. Others were written in shorthand I couldn't decipher. But then I hit a section marked simply, Test Subjects/Outcomes. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about me. Each entry had a set of initials, followed by brief bullet points. Emotional responses. Timeline of withdrawal. Comments like responsive to guilt, or resists confrontation, or displays dependency under stress. I turned to the next page. My initials were at the top, W, J. Underneath it, only 3 lines. Displays full collapse under silent guilt. Self-removal initiated earlier than projected. No re-engagement necessary. Potential for reflection, low. Potential for reflection? Like I was incapable of understanding what had happened? Like my entire marriage had been nothing more than an observation, and my breakdown was expected? I had to roll down the window and breathe cold air just to stop the shaking in my hands. I looked out at the wind-blown field, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if anything I ever felt for her had been mutual. Or had I simply been selected, targeted for a role I didn't know I was playing? She wasn't just done with me. She had studied me like a case file, measured my usefulness, predicted my exit like it was part of some experiment. But why? Why any of this? Why keep me around for 4 years only to catalog my decline in a journal like a psychologist observing a mouse in a maze? I closed the journal and sat in the silence, trying to remember the last time she looked at me like a human being and not an object she was waiting to discard. I couldn't. Every memory that resurfaced now came filtered through this new lens. Her laughs, her sighs, her silences, all of them reframed as calculated responses. Controlled tests. Then I remembered something. The voice recorder she ordered. I opened her journal again, flipping through the back pages. Tucked inside the final entry was a folded receipt from a small electronics shop downtown. Same-day delivery. The total matched what I saw on our Amazon account. But this receipt had one more item listed, one that wasn't in the online records. Micro wireless mic, long range. Model C9, limited batch. It clicked in my head like a bolt locking in place. I checked under the collar of the hoodie I'd grabbed from the house. I checked the inside stitching. Nothing. But now I felt like I was being watched. Recorded. Not just observed after the fact, actively monitored. What if she planted it in my car? What if she wanted to track how I reacted once I found the journal? What if this wasn't over? I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to find that journal. That it was either a mistake, or worse, a trap. Every entry I read brought more questions than answers. The voice recorder, the burner phone, the names written like code. It didn't feel like a marriage anymore. It felt like a case file, a lab report, a controlled demolition, and I was the quiet little structure that had already caved in. But I wasn't done yet. One name kept showing up in the entries, always in the margins, usually with parentheses around it like it was a note she wasn't supposed to include. Elic. He was never listed like the others. No subject summary, no bullet points. Just little breadcrumbs. Eli says patience is the key. Eli confirmed W is nearing critical threshold. Do not repeat last time, Eli warned me. I didn't know who Eli was, but I had a sinking feeling he knew me. Or worse, knew about me. It took me 3 hours of searching through old emails and mutual contact lists to finally find an E. Callahan linked to her. The name showed up on a guest list for a gallery opening she dragged me to last year. He was credited as a visual philosopher, whatever the hell that means. His profile was minimal, but I found an address listed in the event's press release, a studio warehouse on the edge of town. I didn't think. I just drove. When I pulled up, the building looked abandoned. Paint peeling off metal siding. A busted loading dock. A giant mural of a faceless figure holding up a cracked mirror covered the entire left wall. Ironically fitting. I knocked on the rusted door until my knuckles hurt. Eventually, it opened. Not all the way, just enough for a man to peek out. He had dark, shoulder-length hair, wild and uncombed, and a burn scar that ran across the left side of his neck, curling up behind his ear. His eyes didn't flinch when he saw me. He just stared. Wallace, he said. Not a question. A statement. I froze. You shouldn't be here, he added, already starting to close the door. But I shoved my foot in the frame before he could. You know who I am? I asked, my voice shaking more than I expected. He sighed and opened the door wider. Yeah, I know who you are. And if you've made it this far, I'm guessing you found the journal. I stepped inside, heart racing. The place smelled like paint thinner and something metallic, like old coins or blood. The walls were covered in canvases, but none of them had faces. Just outlines. Blurred shapes. People fading into static. Who are you? I asked. What is all of this? Eli walked over to a desk, picked up a cigarette, didn't light it, just held it like a habit. You were part of a study, he said flatly. Informal. Private. No institutions involved, nothing traceable. But real. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She called it behavioral drift observation, he went on. Her theory was that emotionally passive partners, usually men, could be pushed to self-destruct under silent, sustained psychological pressure. No threats. No cheating. Just slow erosion. The kind that doesn't leave bruises. My knees buckled slightly. I leaned against the wall. She used me before, Eli added. I was subject 0. Back when she first started. I was younger, crazier, less patient than you. I snapped after 4 months. Put my fist through a glass window. That's where this came from. He pointed to the scar. Why didn't you warn me? I managed to ask. I did. That's what the journal's for. Every subject finds it, eventually. She lets you. That's part of it. The final phase. See how you react. Some leave. Some beg. Some spiral. She records everything. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was full of cement. She's watching me now? I whispered. Eli gave a faint nod. She doesn't watch like most people. She watches for patterns. You disappeared, didn't you? Vanished quietly. That's a variable she's been waiting to test again. I backed toward the door. This is insane. He didn't follow. Just picked up a piece of chalk and started drawing on the wall like I wasn't even there anymore. She'll reach out soon, he said. Not because she misses you. Because she needs to complete the arc. What happens if I don't play along? I asked. Eli looked at me, eyes dull and sad. Then she starts rewriting your ending for you. I didn't go back to the cabin that night. I couldn't. I didn't want to be alone in a place with no locks, no signal, and no way of knowing if she, or someone working with her, was already watching. So I checked into a cheap roadside motel, the kind with cracked linoleum, buzzing lights, and walls so thin I could hear the man in the next room coughing in his sleep. I paid in cash, signed a fake name, threw a towel over the tiny TV and set a chair in front of the door, not because I thought it would stop anything, but because I needed to believe something would. I didn't sleep, just sat on the edge of the bed all night, the journal in my lap, the pages open to that last entry. No re-engagement necessary. But here I was, spiraling back in, like she knew I would. Eli's words echoed over and over in my skull. She starts rewriting your ending. I kept asking myself the same question. How many people had she done this to? Were they walking around like me? Half alive, half paranoid, afraid of their own thoughts, wondering if every emotion they ever felt was something she'd planned for? Around 10:34 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just 2 soft taps. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I waited, listening for footsteps or a second knock. Nothing. I opened the door slowly, my hand clenched so hard around the knob that my fingers ached. There was no one there. Just a small manila envelope on the ground. No return address. Just my name in shaky black ink. Not Wallace. Just W. I brought it inside with trembling hands, my skin prickling like static. I sat on the bed and opened it, half expecting a thumb drive or another journal page. But there was only a photograph. A single Polaroid. Of me. Asleep. In the cabin. I was curled up on the mattress in my hoodie and jeans, the blankets pulled awkwardly over one shoulder. The angle was from the foot of the bed, low, like whoever took it was kneeling. The timestamp in the corner read 2:42 a.m. 3 nights ago. The night I thought I heard the window creak. The night I thought I'd locked the door. There was writing on the back in the same ink as the envelope. Just one sentence. Your stillness is your most predictable trait. I dropped it. I think I actually whimpered. Not cried, not screamed, just made this raw, pathetic sound that I didn't recognize coming from my own mouth. I stumbled into the bathroom and vomited in the sink. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping the porcelain, trying to convince myself that this was still marital fallout, that this was still just an emotionally broken woman and not something deeper, darker, more controlled. But it was too far past that now. This wasn't rage. This wasn't revenge. This was precision. I left the motel that afternoon, drove 3 towns over, and paid for a burner phone in cash. No calls. No contacts. No GPS. I tossed my own phone in a dumpster behind a gas station. I didn't care about photos or passwords or even my banking apps. I didn't want anything she might have backdoors into. Then I made a mistake. A weak, stupid, human mistake. I called my brother. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. Not since he warned me, at the wedding reception no less, that Callie gave him the cold surgeon vibe. His words. I'd brushed it off as jealousy. He never did well around confident women. But when he answered, I nearly broke. I told him everything. Not the whole thing. Not the experimental psychology or the journal or Eli. Just the basic bones. That I left, that something felt deeply wrong, that I didn't feel safe anymore. I told him about the photo, and how someone had been inside where I was staying. He didn't laugh. He didn't accuse me of being paranoid. He just said, "Wallace, you need to understand something." I waited. Callie didn't just pick you. She filtered for you. I didn't say anything before, but about 6 months before you two got serious, she asked me things. Weird things. Like what kind of stuff makes you shut down? If you ever cry when you're alone. If you'd ever had a breakdown in high school. I thought she was just being thoughtful, or maybe planning a gift or something. But now I'm not sure. My skin went cold. I leaned against the payphone like the air had been sucked out of the world. You think she was planning this from the beginning? I asked. I think, he said slowly, that you weren't the first. I looked at the photograph in my hand again. The sleeping version of me looked peaceful. Still, defenseless. Exactly the way she liked me. Exactly the way she wanted me. I didn't storm into the house. No cinematic confrontation. No shouting match. No triumphant final line. Just slow, careful steps through the same front door I'd once fixed when she said it squeaked too much like I did. I walked inside at exactly 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. Quiet. Unannounced. And this time, she was expecting me. Callie sat in the kitchen, elbows on the table, sipping from a white mug I didn't recognize. Her phone was face down, the same way mine had been. She didn't look surprised, didn't jump or even blink when she saw me. You came back, she said calmly. I didn't come back, I replied. I came to end it. There was a long silence. She set the mug down gently, like any sudden movement might shatter the moment. I was wondering how far you'd get, she said, almost like a compliment. Most don't make it past the journal. I did. I know. I left the envelope. I nodded. The photo was a nice touch. She raised an eyebrow. Predictability. It's all about pressure and patterns. You played your role, right down to the breakdown. But I didn't feel broken anymore. Not now. Not standing here. Not afraid. Not small. I wasn't the same Wallace who whispered apologies in his own home. I wasn't the man who once asked for permission to cry. I was done being studied. I know what this was, I said. I know about Eli. About the entries. About the way you tested us like lab rats. And I know it's not just about psychology. This was control. Obsession. And I don't care how clinical you made it look, it was abuse. That word seemed to catch her off guard. The first crack in the porcelain. She stood, slow and deliberate, walked over to the counter, and pulled open the drawer where we used to keep batteries and gum. Instead, she pulled out a small black notebook. A different one. She handed it to me without a word. Inside, it wasn't logs. It wasn't timestamps or charts or cold, distant observations. It was letters. Unsent. All to me. W. I don't know what's broken in me, but I'm starting to believe it was always there. You deserved something real. You deserved someone better. You never asked for anything. And I punished you for that. I made your silence a mirror of my own failure. I want to say I'm sorry, but I know you don't need that anymore. You need to be free. I looked up. She wasn't smiling. Not smug. Not cold. She looked exhausted. Like someone who had finally finished playing God with other people's hearts and realized she no longer recognized her own. I was going to send those, she said. But I figured they wouldn't matter. Words are what I use to manipulate you. I didn't think you'd believe any more of them. I don't, I said gently. But I believe this. I'm not the same anymore. She nodded once. Slowly. As if she knew this was the part she couldn't control. I left without another word. And this time, the silence wasn't painful. It was peace. 6 months later, I live in a small coastal town 2 states away. I work at a bookstore now. Not for money. I still freelance in the evenings. But because being surrounded by stories reminds me I get to write my own now. One that doesn't involve being dissected. I go on hikes. I read out loud again. I drink my coffee black and bitter, just how I learned to like it when I was alone in that cabin. I even adopted a dog from a rescue shelter. His name's Murphy. He's quiet, loyal, and afraid of storms, just like I used to be. Callie never reached out again. I think, in her own way, that was her final gift, to let me go. And maybe that's what freedom really is, not the absence of pain, but the presence of self. I'm no longer a variable in someone else's study. I'm no longer silent. I'm me. Finally.